Alright, I'm back with video number 4. I'm going to talk about 4 sources, extra biblical sources for Jesus and his existence. I'm going to talk a little bit about Josephus, talk about some Roman historians, the Talmud, and Thales and Phlegon. Josephus, he's probably one of the most well known. He has good volume of his writings in circulation, and his most famous was Antiquities. In that, he was a Jewish historian. What we know, he wasn't a believer. He wasn't a Christian. Because he talked about him from kind of an external perspective. But he talked about Jesus being at least a good teacher, a good moral teacher, being known as the Christ. In Josephus, we learn about a little bit more about a lot of things that parallel with things written in the Gospels, a lot of historical events, such as John the Baptist, his beheading, and the crucifixion of Jesus under Pontius Pilate specifically, the conversion story of James being a Christian, a leader in the Christian congregation, and his martyrdom. A few of the Roman historians we read about in the first century. In first century Palestine would be Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, and Suetonius. Tacitus speaks of Jesus being born in the reign of Augustus, about the same time that we have him recorded in Luke and Matthew, and also about Nero's hatred for the Jews and the persecution that they would do to try and get them to recant their faith, and that the Christians had really good faith in the resurrected Christ, and they wouldn't recant it. Pliny the Younger talked about the burgeoning Christian movement and the examining and the sentencing of Christians that he would do, and how, again, the Christians were being persecuted for their belief in the resurrection of one named Christus, such as Suetonius talks about the instigation of Christus, of Christ, from a bunch of resurrection, and he talked about the expulsion of the Jews from Rome because of it. So we got Josephus, we got three Roman historians, and even the Talmud speaks of Jesus was written before and after Jesus' time. But even though it's negative about Jesus, it still talks about Jesus. What it says about Jesus in 107b of the Talmud, it says that Jesus the Nazarene practiced magic and led Israel astray. So here, even though it's negative, we still know that Jesus existed, that he practiced magic, and that he led many astray. So Jesus was a leader. He led people away from the worldly system that they were used to, or that they were going along with, and that he did practice these great deeds, what we would say miracles, they attributed to magic. And Thales and Phlegon, I wanted to include them because, just having a science background, they both record darkness, possibly an eclipse during the time of Jesus' death. They both talk about time of darkness. So on to my sixth question, the Jewish mindset about the resurrection. Talked a little bit about it during the defense of the resurrection hypothesis. Again, the Sadducees, they didn't have any kind of resurrection mindset, so we don't really need to talk about them. But the resurrection mindset to the Jews was that the resurrection was a single event for everybody at the end of time. It wasn't for one person, it wasn't for a few people, but it was a one-time event, and it was for everybody, not just one man. And even Jesus' followers attest to this truth, because even in their own writings, they say, many of them didn't even believe what he was saying about them, that Christ might suffer and rise again, that the Christ must suffer and rise again, speaking of himself. Martha didn't understand the resurrection. Peter, James, and John didn't understand the resurrection until afterwards, so after they had the revelation of Jesus. Just his claims about the resurrection and the resurrection itself was just so radically different to the Jewish mindset. And again, the Messiah, the concept of a Jewish Messiah, the Messiah wasn't, there were some sects that we could find suffering Messiah, such as Isaiah 53 attests to this, and some of the others. We read in the gospel accounts that people were waiting for the Messiah, were waiting for Jesus, such as the prophetess who came to Mary and Joseph when Jesus was a baby. Anyways, that Jews didn't have a concept of a suffering, much less a dying Messiah, especially in a pathetic way. Anybody who hangs on a tree is cursed. So Jesus hanging on a tree, and this wasn't a picture of a Messiah. Messiah was supposed to be triumphant, was supposed to relinquish Israel from the secular tyranny, and again, the Messiah was supposed to come in and dominate the system and establish a heavenly reign that was supposed to last forever. And the Messiah was supposed to be king of the heavenly kingdom forever, for all eternity. It was supposed to set up the new age with Messiah as king. So on to question 7. What's the weakest link of the resurrection, and how strong is that link? Earlier I was talking about naturalism. I think they're especially today with the rise of secularism, not even just atheism, but militant atheists. Probably the biggest hurdle and the weakest link would be the supernaturalism and the worldview, the presupposition that God exists. So we get lots of questions like, why don't the things in the Bible happen today? Again, this is very subjective. You know what? A lot of people assume that these things that miracles, and we'll talk a little bit about miracles here in a second, but they're recorded by barbarians, by unlearned people, by savages in remote parts of the world. But we don't see that. We see that recordings of miracles throughout all history, by all cultures, all castes of people, all classes, and yeah, even some that aren't Jewish related or of Christian origin, but there's miracles that all over. And really, most the whole anti-supernaturalist movement came about during the little bit before the Enlightenment in the 17th century, by a lot of philosophers. And I got to emphasize that they're philosophers, so the arguments for naturalism are philosophical. So again, they're just on par with any supernaturalist argument, because it's just one argument against the other. And again, so if we look at if we can just establish that God exists, then miracles are possible. There's witnesses of miracles that they're abundant. You can find them anywhere, everywhere. Whether they're true or not, there's certainly a lot of them. Just again, not saying that's proof that miracles are real, but it's just that it defeats the adage that they're just recorded by unlearned people in remote parts of the world. And not believing in miracles isn't a lack of evidence or a lack of experience, because it would be a subjective experience. If it happened to you, then it just happened to you. There's no way I can know, right? That so again, that's not a good argument. A lack of evidence, a lack of experience isn't a good argument. One just needs to really just define miracle to be able to explain that miracles are possible. If you explain a miracle, and what I would do I would ask the naturalist, what proof do you have that miracles are impossible? And if he's going to say something's impossible, he's got to start talking about objective truth, objective realities, and a realm that really a secularist and a naturalist don't want to get into, because then you start getting into transcendence, and then you can start getting into natural theology, which is really where you want to move this to. Once you establish the fact that a creator exists, then miracles are possible. So are miracles possible? Again, just establish a case for a creator. You know what? That number one, the universe began to exist is a huge fact that attests to a creator, a source of the creation. Origin of life, DNA, the teleological argument, cosmological argument, the ontological argument. All these attest to the fact of a creator. And again, if God exists, if a creator exists, then miracles are very much possible.